Rumors are flying that Colorado quarterback Shedeur Sanders could fall in the NFL draft, which in more ways than one could open up some best case scenario opportunities for the New Orleans Saints. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And Saints analyst with WWL TV. On today's episode of Locked On Saints, trading for Trey Hendrickson would be a lot of fun, but it's going to be tough, and it doesn't come down to the draft compensation. The New Orleans Saints coaching staff has a lot of promise, but now comes the next biggest thing, their roster. Still got to get that part figured out. And we're going to kick everything off today with what could be a massive win for the New Orleans Saints in multiple ways if Colorado quarterback Shedeur Sanders does indeed fall in the 2025 NFL Draft. We got all that coming up for you on today's show. We appreciate you, whether it's your first time or your next time, for being here with us this time and making us your first listen, being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you can make every moment more. Your chance to our $150 in bonus bets is waiting over at FanDuel.com today. The New Orleans Saints could be a massive benefactor if the predicted, or I guess it's a rising tide of concerns that Colorado quarterback Shedeur Sanders might fall in the NFL draft. So I want to discuss the three ways that the New Orleans Saints could potentially benefit from a fall if it were to happen. Will the fall happen? We have no idea. Like, anyone that tells you that he is going to fall doesn't actually know that. Anyone that tells you that he is going to fall or isn't going to fall doesn't actually know that. We'll see what happens during the NFL draft. We've seen this before. Back in 2022, Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis, they were supposed to be the two first-round guys. Feels very much like Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders. Then all of a sudden, there were these rising guys like Matt Corral and Desmond Ridder that could potentially be first-round picks, and some sources are saying blah, blah, blah. And three of those four guys all went in the third round. One of them went in the first round. So there's some pieces of this draft that feel very similar to that 2022 quarterback draft. Could we see something happen in this one? Anything is possible when it comes to the NFL draft, especially we still have to see how the free agency carousel at quarterback rotates over the course of the next couple of weeks as well. So ultimately, we'll see where things go. But let's play out the hypothetical. Let's play out the scenario. What happens if Shedeur Sanders falls and is on the board at 9? Well, there's three ways that the New Orleans Saints benefit from that. First of which is by taking him. Plain and simple. First of which is by drafting him. And, look, that doesn't necessarily mean he has to be your starter in 2025. If that happens, it's, every team wants to rush and get their shiny new acquisition out on the field. But one of the reasons why the New Orleans Saints would actually be a positive landing spot for a guy like Shedeur Sanders is that he would effectively have until 2026 before he's really called into action. The New Orleans Saints seem like they're going to be pretty gung-ho on moving forth here, at least for 2025 with Derek Carr. But that doesn't speak to anything having to do with 2026. 2027, 2028, and so on. You still need your future at the position. So bringing in Shedeur Sanders and letting him and Spencer Rattler continue to develop, compete, however it's got to be, and then seeing what you have in a Shedeur Sanders in 2026, not a bad situation. The second place where the Saints could potentially benefit from a fall for Shedeur Sanders is that if they don't take him at 9 and he's still available late in the first round, a la the Baltimore Ravens and Lamar Jackson in the past. Baltimore Ravens were one of the teams that let Lamar Jackson fall all the way down to the end of the first round because they took a player in the first round first and then ended up trading into the first round to select Lamar Jackson. New Orleans Saints could do something similar. There was a Dane Brugler mock draft here recently over at The Athletic where he had Shedeur Sanders not coming off the board until 21 with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But the Pittsburgh Steelers might answer their questions at quarterback in the coming weeks. And so if that were to happen and he were to continue to tumble, the New Orleans Saints, sitting with the 40th overall pick, are not outside of the realm of possibility of potentially trading back into the first round and taking a quarterback should there be a big drop like a Shedeur Sanders, like we saw years ago with a Lamar Jackson. And so that's the second place where they benefit, is that they can take a Tyler Warren, a Tedoroy McMillan, a Mason Graham. They can take a Josh Simmons. They can take a Will Campbell. They can take a James Pierce Jr., an Ashton Ginty, whatever, at pick 9, and then trade back into the first round if Shedeur Sanders falls into the, let's call it the 20s or so. So if there is that major fall, then there is like the major fall, there's an opportunity to potentially come back around to him, pass on him on 9 and say, you know what, if he's still there, though, we'll be aggressive and go and get him. And the New Orleans Saints are known to do exactly that kind of thing. They haven't done it at quarterback, but the mentality changes now. You have a new offensively minded head coach in the building who might be very high on what Shedeur Sanders has to offer in terms of tools, especially his great accuracy and things like that. Number 3, the reason why they could potentially benefit is maybe even the most unlikely scenario, which is a trade back, right? If all of a sudden Shedeur Sanders is there at 9 and there's a team chomping at the bit that wants to get up and go and grab Shedeur Sanders, the Saints could potentially, for the first time since 2007, say, okay, trade back and then take that quarterback tax on top of it and then be able to sit back in the first round a little bit, potentially pick up future picks, potentially even a future first on top of that, and then gather more assets, potentially in this year's draft as well, to be able to continue to stockpile and build their roster. So 3 different ways for the New Orleans Saints to potentially benefit from a Shedeur Sanders fall. Now, why are we talking about a Shedeur Sanders fall at all? I don't know that he necessarily will. I think he'll still be one of the top players off the board. But if he is going to fall, it sounds like one of the big reasons is because he's being criticized for being too confident. I hate this stuff. I absolutely hate this stuff. I despised it, and I've talked about it after Spencer Rattler was drafted, and the big narrative around him was, that he was arrogant and all this stuff, going back to his high school days and the Netflix documentary and all this other stuff. His high school days, when he's playing quarterback in high school. Like, tell me one high school quarterback that wasn't a little arrogant, that wasn't a little cocky, that wasn't super confident. And I don't want a quarterback that's not, if I'm being honest. I wouldn't want a quarterback on my team that's not confident. I wouldn't want a quarterback on my team that's not a little arrogant, right? Like, if you're going to go out there and throw passes, call plays, command a team, run a team, be the face of a franchise, you better be confident. You better be a little arrogant. You'd better have a little bit of an ego that you're interested in protecting. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't want a quarterback to go out there and not be that guy. You know what I mean? You can be that guy quietly, but I don't necessarily need somebody to go out. Like, you can be the confident, arrogant guy quietly, but I don't want you to not be confident. And I don't want you to not be arrogant. There was a report from Josina Anderson, NFL Insider, about a quarterback coach that worked for a team that's drafting the top 7, that criticized Shedeur Sanders for being quote unquote brash and quote unquote arrogant. And sounds like a quarterback coach who got into a little bit of a contest and lost. Is that really what we're doing now? Like, oh, this quarterback's too confident, therefore he's going to fall in the NFL draft? Sure, let him. In fact, no team in the first 39 selections should take him. Like, what are we doing? What is this? So look, if it happens, the New Orleans Saints could be major benefactors. Even without selecting him, they could still benefit from this. It could turn into a draft best case scenario. Like, how awesome, how great would that be for this team? And how excited would you be for that team if at number 9, Shedeur Sanders is still on the board and they decided to trade back and they picked up a boatload of assets to be able to continue to build. And then they turn around and draft like a Jackson Dart later or some other quarterback if they decide to go there, or they ignore this quarterback class altogether because they pick up an extra first round pick next year and they're ready to take advantage of next year's quarterback class potentially with the ability to trade up to the very top of it because they've got those 2 first round picks. Like, there's a lot of opportunity there for New Orleans. It doesn't even include taking he's so confident quarterback. Oh my gosh. Quarterback coach feelings hurt. I'm sick. All right. Anyway, coming up next, we're going to dive into the Saints' new coaching staff, which has a lot of promise. But in order for them to fully realize their promise, there's still work to be done elsewhere. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Everything from live betting to point spreads, to money lines, player props, single game parlays. It's got it all over at FanDuel. And with the NBA season on fire right now, it is a great time to head over to FanDuel today. Especially as a new customer, you can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's all you got to do. You head over to FanDuel.com today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $150 in bonus bets. All you got to do is win that first $5 bet. So take that first $5, put it down on a heavy favorite tonight. The Cleveland Cavaliers, who are one of the hottest teams in the NBA right now, 16-point favorites over the hapless Charlotte Hornets, an absolute banger of a line to get in on, especially when you're looking for a heavy favorite. Win with that $5, $150 in bonus bets as a new customer. You can make every moment more over with FanDuel today, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, family, the New Orleans Saints announced their official coaching staff. We're not going to go through every single name because that's just boring TV, boring radio. But what we will do here is take a look at the reason why I think that this coaching staff has promise, but why that's not going to be enough, right? Because the New Orleans Saints have effectively, to this point, because free agency hasn't happened yet, the draft hasn't happened yet, all these other things. But to this point, it sounds like the New Orleans Saints are more interested in player retention than shedding talent, right? They want to stick with Derek Carr. They're interested still in continuing things on with guys like Paulson Adebo and Cam Jordan. They believe that Taysom Hill is still a part of their future next year. Although the big question really comes down to Taysom Hill when it comes down to like health more than anything else, right? Not willingness to play or the Saints' willingness to still have him on a team. It's just when will he be available? It's just like a simple timeline question. They've even made some indications that they're like keeping the door open for guys like Chase Young and stuff like that. There's been some lingering, though unsubstantiated reports so far about the Saints and Chase Young having already reached an extension, but nothing confirmable at this time and stuff like that. So we'll kind of see where things go. But for the most part, it sounds like the Saints are interested in retention and addition to their roster as opposed to wholesale change on their roster. And so the wholesale change instead happened on the coaching staff. And the coaching staff has a lot of promise. I like the way, I've highlighted this before, but the two things that really stand out to me in terms of how, three things that really stand out to me in terms of how this coaching staff was built. Number one was some self-awareness from Kellen Moore. First-time head coach, 36 years old. He now has two former head coaches on his staff in defensive coordinator Brandon Staley, as well as senior offensive assistant, Scott Linehan. And then in bringing back running back coach Joel Thomas, who was with the Saints, departed last year to the New York Giants on a what we call like a lateral move, right? Kept the same position, but just went to a different team. And then now returned to New Orleans in what we assumed was another lateral move, keeping that running back coach title, is now also the associate head coach. So he's associate head coach and running back coach. So what you see there is Kellen Moore building people around him to help him be a better head coach. Not just, I'm already a great head coach, let me build out my staff. It was, let me get the staff that I want, but also the people that I can have bend my ear a little bit and say, hey, this works, that works, try this, try that. This is what I did in that situation. Hey, what did you do in this situation? How did you handle that? All those other things. I love that move. And it also gives the Saints two additional presences when like an offensive meeting has to happen, but Kellen Moore has a head coach thing he's got to do. I don't know how often that'll happen, but you've got an offensive coordinator in Doug Nussmeier who's got a ton of experience, and you've got a guy who's an associate head coach in Joel Thomas that can hold that down to allow Kellen Moore to be able to focus on head coachy things that he's got to do, checking in with training staff, checking in with the general manager, front office, all these other things. Like there's a lot that goes into it. So I love the self-awareness and almost the self-critique in a way. And remember when I say critique, I'm not just saying being critical. I mean the act of critiquing. What is good, what is bad, what works, what does not work is critiquing. And so just an act of self-critique by Kellen Moore to say, I am a first-time head coach. Let me bring some people around me who have some additional insight that might be beneficial to me. So that's number one. Number two was the defensive coaching staff. And we were right. There's an edges coach, which is different from the defensive line coach, which is different from the linebacker coach. So that tells you 3-4. And also a focus on coaching edge rushers. Applause, applause, applause. A promotion for a guy like Brian Young, who goes from being a defensive assistant to assistant defensive line coach, while Bo Davis comes in as defensive line coach. I mean, what a hire, Bo Davis. Then you add on top of that the separation that's going on in terms of defensive backs. You have the defensive passing game coordinator. Then you also have a cornerbacks coach, and you also have an assistant defensive backs coach. So safeties will get a little bit of specific attention. Corners will get a little bit of specific attention. I like that as well. Break everything down to the position that you're talking to. Don't have to try to speak two languages in those situations when you do that. So I like the defensive structure of the coaching staff, which gives us a glimpse of the turnover that's expected over on the defensive side. If I'm expecting roster turnover anywhere, it's on the defensive side of the football. We'll get to that here in just a second. The third thing that I really like, head coach is a former NFL quarterback, offensive coordinator, former NFL quarterback coach, former NFL quarterback. With all of that being the case, it shows you that they're interested in developing a young quarterback, whether it's an incredible drop for Shedeur Sanders, or whether it's an investment in a guy like Jackson Dart, or it's an investment into the 2026 draft class. All very possible options for New Orleans, and all very good things to be ready for, just in case. And then also, you still have a young quarterback in your building right now, and Spencer Rattler, that this front office believes in very much, and that this coaching staff really likes. And so you're continuing to focus some development there as well. So you have this coaching staff that packs a lot of promise, right? And it's not like a coaching staff that's completely reliant upon familiarity. Oh, well, these are Kellen Moore guys, and, you know, the Brandon Staley just went and hired a bunch of Chargers and Rams guys. It's not really what happened. You know, there's more of the Kellen Moore guys, which makes sense because you're trying to institute that offense and all those other pieces. I understand that. But I love the approach on the defensive side of kind of a lack of familiarity and just kind of hiring the best coaches that they were going to get at whatever level. And I really like that approach too. So you have the promise of the New Orleans Saints coaching staff, but it's not going to be enough. It's not just the promise of the coaching staff. This is a coaching staff that's going to be very busy. It's going to have to work very hard here in 2025. It's going to have to work very hard here in 2025 to install a new offense and install a new defense all at the same time. And so I would expect that there will be some roster turnover, but if you're relying mostly on the coaching staff to make this team better by not making as many moves in terms of change on your roster, particularly on the offensive side of the football, then keep your fingers crossed, because it's a tall task to be able to do that. You've got to be able to have the depth. So addition is going to be important. We'll see what happens when it comes to the defensive side, but it feels like that's where you're going to see the most turnover. Finding people that fit Brandon Staley's scheme and system and things like that. Shedding some of the talent that maybe doesn't necessarily fit the system, that's still talented, but just doesn't work for what it is that the New Orleans Saints are wanting to do. That's where I think you're going to see the most turnovers on the defensive side. But I don't know that you're going to see a lot of it. I could see names like, one of the big names that's floating around right now is Kellen Saunders. I don't know that the Saints need to be in a rush to move on from Bink, but if they did, saves $2.6 million. He's in the final year of his deal. Like, it's just the life cycle of the NFL. That's kind of where these types of things happen. Nathan Shepard, same conversation, saves you a little bit less money. But again, it's the conversation of, in the final year of the deal, ability to save some cash. Do they fit the system? Do they not fit the system? All those other things. So it's really not a conversation of like individual talent more than it is about individual fit. So that's where I would see a lot more challenge, change, stuff like that happening, is over on the defensive side. So the coaching staff is impressive, don't get me wrong, but the Saints still have some tinkering to do on this roster in order to really be able to say, okay, it's not wholesale change, but here's what we're selling, right? Here's what the sell is for that new coaching staff moving forward. So expect a lot of addition, free agency, the draft, not so much change, with the exception probably being over on the defensive side. And then we'll see what this coaching staff is able to do with that. If the roster doesn't see a ton of turnover and just sees additions, and the coaching staff elevates this to this team with similar starters on the offensive side to greater production, greater health, all of those stuff, there's changes on the strength and conditioning and sports science, all this stuff. It's a little bit of a condemnation of the last couple of years, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like, you're like, oh, well, you've had this talent for a little while and you haven't been able to do anything with it. Goes to show you. And that's not on the organization. That's on the coaching staff. Or I guess it's on the organization for choosing that coaching staff. But man, it kind of really makes you wonder, like, wow, had they made the changes that it felt like they should have made last offseason, where would things be for this team right now? But that won't matter. Not about hindsight. All about what's moving forward. New Orleans Saints coaching staff shows some promise for what is moving forward. Coming up next, trading for former New Orleans Saints defensive end Trey Hendrickson sure is a fun idea, but it'd be tough to swing. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. It's that time of year. Everyone becomes available. Everyone wants everyone to go to every team. Every fan wants every team to want everyone. It is that time of year. We love it. Former defensive end Trey Hendrickson. Still kind of, it's not that, it's baffling is what it is, that was not the player that the Saints decided to like lean in on. But anyway, again, we're not about hindsight. We're about the future. Has requested a trade from the Cincinnati Bengals. Cincinnati Bengals have reportedly agreed to entertain such an idea. This is pretty simple to me. I don't think Trey Hendrickson gets traded. I think this is yet another, just like we said with Matthew Stafford. This is, I think I'm worth this much money. And then the Bengals say, we don't think you're worth that much money. However, go out there, talk to other teams, have your representation talk to other teams. If you were to trade for me, how much would you pay me? What kind of extension would you be willing to give me? All these other things. And then get those numbers, bring them back to us. We'll decide if we're going to, the Bengals, decide if we're going to give you that contract extension, basically. So that's what I think is going to happen here. But there is always a chance that he actually gets traded. And a lot of New Orleans Saints fans are wondering if the Saints can kind of make up for not paying Trey Hendrickson back in the day and trading to acquire him now. And I think there's a couple of things we have to remember here, that trading for Trey Hendrickson is not just about what the draft capital is. There's some rumors that it's like a second or a third round pick to potentially get him, or the value of. He's going into his age 31-year-old season, so maybe people are expecting his contract to be a little bit, or expecting his value to be a little bit lower because of that, like whatever it might be. But the thing about it is that it's not just about the draft capital that you're potentially surrendering in that situation. It's about much more than that. You're looking at the draft capital that you're giving up. You're looking at the contract that you might have to give him. You're looking at a lot more. And the contract that you might have to give him is not just about the contract that he currently has, which is right now he's sitting on in 2025, he's sitting on an $18.6 million cap hit, which includes $15.8 million base salary at this moment. Right? That's what's there for 2025. But it's the last year of his deal. This is a time to where sometimes players get moved. But really, this is about posturing in order to receive a contract extension. That's really the big thing here. So get traded to another team, get an extension. What does that extension look like? Well, you can look at things like market values and stuff like that. You can wonder what Trey Hendrickson might be worth, all this other stuff. But here's the fact of the matter. Trey Hendrickson is one of the best pass rushers in the NFL, period, full stop. One of the other best pass rushers in the NFL, Max Crosby, just got a record-breaking contract, 3 years, $106.5 million extension with $91.5 million guaranteed, the highest paid non-quarterback contract in NFL history. Those numbers per ESPN's Adam Schefter. You're not paying Trey Hendrickson money. You're paying Trey Hendrickson some kind of money that's based off of Max Crosby money. Now, probably less than Max Crosby, but you better believe that Trey Hendrickson's people, his representation, who get paid a percentage off of the contract that he gets, want him to get paid Max Crosby money. And so it's not just as simple as trying to repair the, decisions of the past or anything like that when it comes to a potential trade for Trey Hendrickson. You're not just giving up a draft pick or two or some group of draft picks that equals the value of a higher draft pick, whatever that might be. You're surrendering a lot of money. And you're surrendering a lot of money to a 31-year-old defensive end. Now, you might say, Ross, you advocated for signing a 30-plus-year-old wide receiver the other day in Devontae Adams. This is true. I did advocate for that because it was a one-year deal. I'm not talking about paying, and I'm talking about a one-year deal that's cost-effective. I'm not talking about a $100 million contract in total, value for a 30-plus-year-old edge rusher that doesn't fit your new scheme, by the way. If he does fit your new scheme, he fits your new scheme as a guy that's a potential 3-4 defensive end, not necessarily a stand-up pass rusher. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? Like, there's more than just the name and the former team connection and all those other things. You'd have to have the specific role. Now, if he can actually play that stand-up pass rusher role, then maybe things are a little bit different. And maybe Brandon Staley feels that he can do that. I can't speak to that at the moment. I know he stood up. He does a lot of two-point stance stuff for the Bengals. It's not that crazy to assume it, but he's probably at this point less desirable than some of the stand-up edge rushers in this year's draft class, for instance. And when I say less desirable, I don't mean that from a talent perspective. I mean that from a cost effectiveness perspective, right? Getting that person that can come in and have an 8 to 15, I don't want to say 15, let's say 8 to 12 sack year for you in a couple of years on a rookie contract is probably better than the $100 million total value contract that you might have to give a guy like Trey Hendrickson, or would likely have to give a guy like Trey Hendrickson. So would it be fun? 100%. It would be a cool story. It's kind of reminiscent of the Malcolm Jenkins return to New Orleans, which, mind you, was a free agency return, not a trade return. So it wasn't, giving up draft capital and all this stuff, but it was a sensible contract in terms of getting a guy back that Sean Payton openly admitted was a big mistake, and they never should have let him go in the first place. I don't know that you're going to get an admission of mistakes very often from coaches and general managers, but that was certainly one of them. I don't know that you're going to get an admission of mistake from not keeping Trey Hendrickson around, but certainly like the Trey Hendrickson side of this in favor, like letting Trey Hendrickson walk in favor of further investment in Marcus Davenport was a failed situation, right? There's like we can all agree with that. Like Marcus Davenport isn't on the team anymore. Marcus Davenport never panned out. Marcus Davenport went to other teams and also didn't pan out. Like all of that seems like it's fair to say that was in hindsight. And again, I've done the hindsight thing a little bit more than I usually do in this episode. So take it while you get it, because usually that's not my style. But like we can say in hindsight, not great. You know what I mean? And so, so it'd be a cool thing, be a great story, be a lot of fun. And if it does happen, I'd praise it. You know what I mean? Like, no problem. It's just that it's tough to see them executing it right now. It's just one of those ones where I wouldn't like develop the expectation for it, but it doesn't mean that they can't do it. It's just one of those things where like, it's not as easy as just the reported draft capital desire. There's other aspects to this that aren't even dictated by Trey Hendrickson, aren't even dictated by the New Orleans Saints, and certainly aren't dictated by the Cincinnati Bengals, who are showing you that they value T. Higgins more than they value Trey Hendrickson. Also bad choice. But it's just, there's all these elements, right? It's all dictated by, in a way, Max Crosby in the Las Vegas Raiders in a way that's really, really weird. And so I just wanted to highlight that. Like, would it be cool? Yes. Would it be awesome if they did it? 100%. It would be super helpful to them, more than likely. Especially if they did have that place where he's a fit. I don't know if he is, but if they did have that place where he's a fit, yeah, 100%. Makes perfect sense. But it's not as simple as, oh, well, they just want a second round pick. This is easy. Nah, there's a little bit more that none of the parties that are actually involved, unfortunately, have control over. All right, y'all. Coming up in tomorrow's episode, I want to dive back into free agency and get into the defensive line a little bit. There's the big name out there in terms of Milton Williams, but who else could the New Orleans Saints bring in to help them out? So we'll be back to our Saturday and Sunday episodes, which probably be out like later in the afternoon and stuff like that. So we'll have a defensive line free agency class kind of breakdown in tomorrow's episode. We appreciate you very much. As always, making us your first listen. Go and check out Locked On NFL Draft for your second listen today. They're absolutely killing it, getting you ready for the NFL Draft. We thank you very much for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me in the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.